Let's talk about the business of the day as it relates to theater with your hosts, Darnell Radford and Mitch Weiss. This is The Business of Theater, a working title. Mitch, I know we are looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast The Business of Theater, Stop Producing Art and Start Producing Impact.
Actually, that sounds like a good idea, but I don't think anyone would understand it.
Yeah, well, it is a subtitle of a new book, so I guess we can't use
there you go. We'd be sued, of course. The author would come right after us for plagiarism.
Well, he'll be right in line behind all of the music rights that we are in violation.
We sing from every show we can think of, and we know they're coming after us someday along, especially Universal, right?
Yes, we'll need like an overarching system where we can pay a flat rate so that we can just belt them out as we go, and they're all completely tied to.
Oh no, that's back to the old days. Never going to happen.
We'll get Woodsy on it, and we'll take a look at it.
Okay.
But this is The Business of Theater, a working title. I am Darnell Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And let's get down to business. So today in the virtual studio, we have a guest with us. We have a guest who's an author of the new book, or newish book. It's still new. It's new. Yeah, it's a new book called Scene Change: Why Today's Nonprofit Arts Organizations Have to Stop Producing Art and Start Producing Impact. The author is Alan Harrison, and Alan is in the studio with us today. So, Alan,
it's good to be here.
Podcast.
And I get to start with thanking Alan for being the very first person who I read online that actually spoke sanity to me. You know, and I didn't know who he was. I remember actually the first thing I read of yours, Alan, writing a note to you at the end going, "Who are you? How do I follow you?" Right? And you wrote back, which was great. You just said, "Keep following," and that was the end of that. And I have. So we're thrilled to have you here, and I'm thrilled to know your work.
Thank you.
Your ideas.
My work brings you sanity. I don't know who that says more about me or you, but I'm glad to be a voice of reason where clearly those are rare, and that is in the nonprofit arts industry.
Oh boy, absolutely. And so, if you don't mind, and Darnell, shut me up if you have another direction, but give us a very quick. When did you first start working in the nonprofit industry, and at what point did you say no more?
It wasn't a case of no more, but let me start. It was 30 years of work, all told. I started working in New York while I was an actor in promotion, and that's a really fancy way of saying I handed out flyers at the TKTS line, which is if you don't know what that is, it's the half price tickets day of. Back then, we're talking about the mid '80s. It took place in a trailer on 47th and Broadway, and when I say trailer, it was a pretty dilapidated trailer on top of that.
It was.
But that's where it was all happening, and there would be thousands of people who would go there the day of, tourists mostly, and buy tickets the day of for whatever was available. And most of the shows were available, just not the biggest selling one. And obviously, on Saturday nights, it was even less than that. But I learned some things by working there. I learned about audience behavior. I learned who makes the decisions in the family. I learned that women are more, this is broad generalization, so please forgive that. But women in these very bridge and tunnel crowd families were far more adventuresome with what they wanted to see. Men would actually pay money to see a show they'd seen before because at least they knew what they were going to get. It was that kind of stilted. At the same time, it was in the middle of in the 80s, that was not the safest neighborhood in the world, outside at 47th and Broadway. And as I mentioned in the book, briefly, there was a man who used to live underneath the trailer. His name was Sam, and Sam used to come out every day. Are you familiar with the movie Raising Arizona? Either of you? There's a scene in which. Okay, so there's a scene in which John Goodman escapes from prison by coming through this hole in the ground, and it's wet, it's pouring rain, and it kind of looks like birth happening. Well, that's how Sam used to emerge from under the trailer. He was actually sleeping there. So, and then he was rambling on, and I same army shirt, same jeans, same smell, same everything. And he would propose to the women who worked there on a regular basis. He was, and then he would panhandle a bit. And then at the end of the day, when the place was closing at 8:00, I'd see him going up to 55th Street. I think there was a shelter or a soup kitchen or something up there. And all I could think of at the time was, here's a guy whose life depends on the theater, who has never stepped into a theater in his life, or if he has, it's irrelevant to this conversation. His entire life is predicated on people going to the theater. And I thought, even then, I was in my mid-20s, there's more to life than just doing a show and having jazz hands and all of those things. And so that was sort of the beginning of it. Then I was fortunate enough to start working at Lincoln Center Theater. That was my first full-time nonprofit theater job. And that was early in the days. We had just made the decision when I got there to mail a letter to all the subscribers to say, you're not a subscriber anymore. And we switched over to this membership version where people paid $10 a year and got, $25 a year, and they got one ticket per play per membership at $10. And that really worked well. And it worked so well that we thought of ways to make it work for younger people, because that was always the problem. If you think the age problem in theater is recent, you're wrong. It goes all the way back. And so we actually gave away 100,000 memberships to students across New York, so they could all buy tickets for $10. That gave me the idea that, I wonder if ticket price just planted a seed in my head is the issue. I left New York, was working for several different nonprofits, both in Southern California, ultimately the Pasadena Playhouse. Then I was headhunted for Pittsburgh Public Theater. At Pittsburgh Public Theater in the mid-'90s, I instituted a program myself. I say I did because I had to fight everybody around me about it. And the idea was to sell tickets to anyone under the age of 25 for $10. And it wasn't a student rush. It wasn't, no one else was doing this, by the way, at the time. No one. We invented it. Not a student rush. Use a credit card if you want. If it's fifth row center, it's fifth row center. The only difference between anybody else picking up the phone and buying a ticket and you is that you paid $10 and that we held the ticket at the box office so you could show your ID at the box office. That was it. And it was age related because what we had discovered was there were a whole bunch of lovely people who made a ton of money who were taking one class at the community college in underwater basket weaving, and they would show their student ID and we'd have to give them tickets. So it wasn't about them. It was about getting younger people in the theater. That immediately worked. Even in Pittsburgh, which was at the time was a pretty old demographic county. At the time, it was the oldest. It had just passed Dade County, Florida, as the oldest demographic county in the United States. So, and these were the ones who didn't have money to move to Florida. So it's not like they were.
And what position were you in?
That was director of marketing and communications. So my job was to sell the image of the theater. Oh, and by the way, sell tickets. So then that worked really well. And I started getting phone calls, including from Seattle Rep, who headhunted me there. I went to Seattle Rep, was there for 3.5 years. We instituted the same program there because even though Seattle has young people living in it, they weren't going to Seattle Rep. It was a country club. And unfortunately, I can say that it has pretty much reverted to being a country club now. But back then, we got as many as 20,000 people under the age of 25 in a year to come to the 9 plays that they did that year. And that's as opposed to 1,000 tickets sold at student rush prices before we began the program. So that's a huge influx. Plus, it changes the profile of the audience, both in terms of youth. Now you have young people in the audience. So young people see other young people in the audience and they think, okay, this is a place for me to go. And then with youth, with people under the age of 25, other things come into play. Race is not an issue. It's far less of an issue in a place like Seattle. So it's suddenly our ethnic demography was being more varied and more diverse, and everything was moving in the right direction. I left there to go run bless their hearts, the Alabama Shakespeare Festival in Montgomery, Alabama, for 3 years. I have been told, it wasn't somebody I read it in a Mark Twain quote in Innocents Abroad. He said, to live a full life, you have to live in a foreign country where they don't speak your language for 3 years. And I believe I've done that by having lived in Alabama. It was kind of a crazy place to live, but we did okay. You know, they had 6 straight years of 6-digit shortfalls.
Really? I know that Alabama Shakespeare has such a good reputation amongst regional theaters.
Or at least it did.
They were having that
major
kind of
financial problems for years and years and years. And part of it,
interesting.
Well, here's the deal. If you 40% of the audience was coming outside of 250 miles of the theater, they wanted to see Shakespeare. The people who lived within 250 miles didn't want to see Shakespeare. So during the winter and spring, fall, winter, spring, which was just a regular old Lort season, play after play, they wanted to see always Patsy Cline. And they would have seen it 53 times if they could. That spoke to them. A show about Elvis spoke to them. They didn't want to see Tennessee Williams because he was vulgar. They didn't want to see, they barely wanted to see To Kill a Mockingbird. Mostly that was the schools that were forced to see it, and not all the schools and not all the counties, because they just politely declined. It was stepping back in time.
So it's fascinating. Now we're getting toward kind of where your writing is these days. How do you fix a problem like that? So much of what nonprofits talk about is providing, quote unquote, art or entertainment for their audience. And if their audience wants Patsy Cline and Elvis, how do you balance that with your own notion of
frankly, we
success?
had two really bad arrows flying in the air there. One was the one you mentioned, the local audience wanting to see Patsy Cline and Elvis and A Christmas Carol, and that was it. And then the other arrow is we had an artistic team that was not unusual, and even today is not unusual. In fact, there is no training for artistic direction, really. There are MFA programs on how to be a director, but not how to be an artistic director, which is a different kettle of fish. And in this case, he's a brilliant, relatively academic. It was Ken Thompson, very wonderful guy, couldn't be nicer, relatively academic, relatively artistically minded, and he kept saying we need to put on excellent art. And I was thinking about that even then. I had not completely formed my opinions on how this works yet, the way I have now. So the other arrow is, I need to do really good art. Well, no, you don't. I mean, you need to do, you're a nonprofit. You get to do what the community, it's not what the community wants. It's not what your audience wants. It's what your community needs. So that's different. So how do you find out what your community needs? You ask them. and you go to the leaders of the community, it's not hard. Again, this is not hard to fix. It just requires you to subsume your ego. It has nothing to do with your art. It has nothing to do with what your audience wants, and I put that in quotes. It has to do with what your people in your community need. I talk about this a lot in the book, but one of the things is that there are three different things when it comes to nonprofit arts organizations. There is art. Art is essential. Art is essential in the literal sense. It's essential because anything is art. I'm holding a bottle cap in my hand. It's art. It can be construed as art. Mm-hmm. Anything I always think of that old, there was a stand-up comedian who used to say, we were so poor that on the 4th of July, we just shut our eyes and did this and rubbed them. And that was our art. We couldn't afford the fireworks, so we did that. So art is everywhere. You can't not have art. Art does not exist, I suppose, in a vacuum, but happily we don't live in a vacuum. Artists are magical. Artists are transcendent. Artists are amazing creatures because they can take all of these little pieces of art that they find, whether it's from oral, it's heard art or spoken art or visual art or whatever, danced art. And they can put pieces of it together and come up with a new thing. The Sondheim, look, I made a hat where there never was a hat. They make a thing that has more value because it has become an artistic piece, a new piece that never existed before, and now it exists. And now that has value. Arts organizations are neither essential nor have inherent value. Their value comes because they're charities, and I hate to break it to every nonprofit arts organization who is listening to this right now, but you're a charity. Your company is a charity. A 501c3 is a charity, just like the Red Cross, a food bank, all of it. It's a charity. And for charities to prove worth in this society, you have to show measurable, tangible, quantifiable results that you have made the community better off. And you can't make the community better off merely by the production of art. That doesn't work. In fact, it's part of the reason why if you actually read the statute from the IRS, art is never mentioned as a tax-exempt activity.
Absolutely. It says you have to have educational.
Even more. They get even more specific. They get into animal cruelty. They get into doing things to substitute for the government. Take a government program, and if you do it, that's worth it.
So how did we lose our way, Alan?
I think we lost our way when it became about 50 years ago, maybe 50, 60 years ago. When people started talking, they were defending art based on, or the production of art, based on a three-legged stool. Now that stool is leg-free. But at the time, the three legs were, look, all the people that are coming. We're counting butts in seats. Well, the problem with that metric is that by that definition, I don't know, the Yankees could be a nonprofit because they get butts in seats. Disney's the big one. Disney is actually an arts organization.
Yeah.
A commercial arts organization that PS sent 100,000 meals to soldiers through the USO program last year. So tell me what you guys are doing to help people. That's why the arts aren't in there now. People ask me, well, if it was so important, why don't they just add it back into the statute? You've had 70 years. 1954 was when the statute was passed. So it's 2024. That's 70 years ago. Never been added. Well, it hasn't been added because the government doesn't want Disney to be a nonprofit. There are a lot of tax revenue that they would then say, oh, cool, we don't have to.
Well, the other part of this, Alan, it seems to me that if you don't need to be tax-free, if you are making bucks from whatever entertainment or art or whatever you are producing, then why have to go through the paperwork and all of the, having a board of directors telling you this, telling you that? Why do you need any of that? Why not just be a commercial arts organization? And I will argue that at the beginning level, dealing with artists that need your help, that might be a cause
if you're teaching,
for a nonprofit.
If you're educating them.
Yeah, if you're teaching. Well, or if you're, in my case, I believe in developing. If you're developing work to help them learn their own craft
bigger goal
and move along. Yes,
so there are two answers.
Absolutely.
There are two answers to that.
Absolutely.
One, there is no moral high ground to having a nonprofit organization, but people start these arts organizations and immediately become nonprofits because it's easy. It's really not difficult to form a nonprofit. And because, well, what's the worst answer you have ever gotten from somebody who worked for you about why they do a particular process a given way? Because we've always done it that way. And without not even knowing why they've always done it that way. Well, we do it this way. And that's what's happened. So it became I guess we need to start a nonprofit so we can go raise money, so that we can go do art, so that we can fail. They never count on that last part, but that happens. The other reason why they don't become for-profit is because they think it's hard. It's actually not hard. They think that's for Broadway people or for at best, or they think it's really difficult, or how are they going to make money if they can't take contributions? And the answer is you don't. You take investments instead. When I produced two plays off Broadway, and I remember, never forget, one of the people who was advising me said, well, you need to do a few things before you can produce a play. Two of them are this. Go read the book, The Season, which is an old book. It's about the 1968 Broadway season, and it is brilliant. It is the beginning of rehearsal all the way to the close of every single show that opened on Broadway that year. So you get all the stories of all the shows and what happened and how they raised the money and who raised it, and et cetera. And then also in 1968 was this movie called The Producers. And while it's a comedy, the essence of The Producers is actually how you raise money. You don't get, little old ladies, but it's not far off. You're getting little old ladies to donate to you. Why don't you get them to invest into the show?
Well, I was working on, and I guess we've already named it in a previous episode. I was working on a musical called Romance. Romance was
good, but Romance was
and
okay.
The second half lost it all. The two writers were, I think, and forgive me if I have their age wrong, they were about 29 years old. They were two guys. Very sweet, very nice. The show got pretty good reviews, but it lasted about...
Okay.
No, he was in it. Scott was in
London
it.
And Perlman?
Good memory. Good
was
memory.
It London and Perlman?
Ooh, I don't...
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. No, I don't remember. Anyway, the point is I asked them in the lobby, I said, you're not Sondheim, you're not Rodgers and Hammerstein. How did you? And you didn't start in a regional theater and someone saw it, fell in love, and moved it to Broadway. How did you get your show to Broadway? And they said, our family paid for this. And that opened my eyes. I was young at the time when this happened, luckily. And the understanding that the only thing, you're talking about what makes you a producer, right. You got money. And if you can't raise it, that's all you need. There are people running dry cleaners who say, I run a business. Why can't I produce on Broadway? I have friends who have money.
Right.
Right? So that's another thing with the commercial field. The nonprofits, it's because they don't have relatives who have millions of dollars. And so they're going, I have to beg everyone in the community for $100 to see if I can get enough money to put on a show that I want to put on, not necessarily. Oh, that's right. What the artistic do. And I feel bad because Darnell's staying out of this, but Darnell is in the middle of a nonprofit right now. I feel terrible that we're not dishing about your nonprofit.
Producer on this episode.
No, you've got to jump in. I know he's got opinions. I've heard them all.
I have opinions.
I've heard them all.
I'm just enjoying this conversation as it's going, and I'm taking notes.
Well, the notes are in his book. Yeah, really.
I do have some questions though.
Go for it.
I want to know. Like, what was your thought process at the beginning of the pandemic, and when we started feeling more optimistic about moving forward?
Do we feel more optimistic about moving forward? I don't feel that. I honestly don't.
Question. I mean, so I feel like there was a point where we were grasping at every little bit of progress and kind of, not patting ourselves on the back with it, but like aggressively leading with it. Like, Broadway had a good week. This is a sign of positive things, but it's just Broadway having a good week. Everything else is still there. The concerns are still there. But yeah, go back to March 2020. What was your mindset?
Where were you at that time?
Seattle.
What were you doing?
I had really I was back in my consulting business, which then, ended. But I was okay. Personally, financially, whatever, I was fine. So that wasn't really the problem. The problem was I was going a little stir crazy. But I also observed how theaters responded to it. It was part of that process. So what are the first words we started using in the pandemic? Essential. An essential business, an essential employee. We started using essential in its real sense. So essential is a healthcare worker. Essential is a delivery service. Essential is a restaurant. But essential is not art. And yet, art is, but these arts organizations, they're not essential. So all you kept...
Especially since we had free art delivered to our homes on television.
Yeah. So not even, you actually are conflating two things that are correctly conflated. So people started streaming their plays onto YouTube with a one camera or a two camera thing. And so what's the competition of your...
Yeah, it was not meant as a public.
But when people would start advertising, we're doing our shows online. And I'm thinking, yeah, they started doing that in the 20s, became really popular in about the 50s. I think we called it television. And the problem with streamed plays online is that they're not artistic. They're not of excellent quality. They can't be, because of the way it's set up. You've got one camera in the back. It's not going to be that good. There could be, Metropolitan Opera in a movie theater, and that's pretty special. But they're on stage, the camera people. You had the National Theatre in London doing the same thing. They were on stage with them. So that gives you a different and there were six cameras. So that gives you a little different perspective. But when I Love Lucy has better, production values than your version of The Taming of the Shrew, guess which one I'm going to watch? And they're both free. And it's worse if you start charging for yours, because then why would I ever pay for that? So this inflated ego part of the we're essential argument was just making me nuts. And that's when it really struck me hard. There are people who are dying right now of COVID. They are... I'm not saying they're dying laughing like it's a metaphor. They're dying. What the hell are you doing about it? And if a nonprofit, any nonprofit of any type says, well, this is what we're doing, and we're providing care, we're providing drugs, we're providing, or like the post-AIDS movement, we're providing care and hospice and food and delivery services and all that, great. But if you're just putting on a show, that ain't great. And especially if you're doing it for yourself. So that led to that, going back to that other conversation of the three-legged stool. That's the butts and seats issue, which is not a leg. The second leg is positive economic impact. We do plays, and everybody who comes also spends money on parking and babysitters and dinner and drinks. And somebody put this wild ass number of $25 per person to it. And not only is that kind of a crock because they pulled the number out of the air, but and then they said, so we have 10,000 people coming and we provide a $250,000 positive economic impact to our city. Ain't we grand? Well, no, because the problem is, even if that were true, any restaurant in your neighborhood could claim the same thing. Any of them, because people go to restaurants, they pay babysitters and they sometimes pay for parking and they might buy drinks at someplace else. Oh, and they might have tickets to a show. So they're providing just as much effort as you are. And if they can't claim to be a nonprofit, how can you claim to be a nonprofit? So leg 2, broken. Leg 3 is a little, for lack of a better word, squishy. Students who take part in an after-school music program have better math test scores. So it's a relatively specific thing. It's music and it's test scores.
I remember that one.
Okay.
I remember that one.
So there was one study.
Oh, my God. That was awful.
It was pretty good. It was a good study, and it provided national data. It was never followed up. No arts organization ever followed up on it. So my question to anybody who raises that as a metric, I say, great. I'm sure you did your own study. How many of your students have better test scores because of attending your arts organization? And are you testing them before and after the shows? And are you, what about your regular audience? Because if it's good for the students, it must be great for the adults. So are you giving them bubble tests before the show and then bubble tests after the show? See if they learned anything. What activities did they do after they saw their show that let you see that they made an impact in their own community? If you're just doing art that is, let's say, politically motivated, great. What happened after that? Or did you just stand up, do a polemic, and call it a day, and beat them over the head with an idea, and then let them go on their merry way? Some people like that. I mean, it's good art as far as art's concerned, but that's not the question. The question is, what did you do as a nonprofit? And the answer there is nothing. You've done nothing. So that leg is broken. So 3 broken legs, we have to start over again. And the way that we can start over again, there's one key element to the whole thing. It's the magic. We've talked about the 501c as the Willy Wonka magic golden ticket, but really it's about intent. If you're running a nonprofit arts organization, whether it's a theater or a symphony or whatever, and you have the intent to do it to save the community in relatively specific ways, and you want to measure that, you can. And when you do that, you stop begging for money. You stop begging for arts dollars. You start getting money from other sectors. You become a real civic, activity. You become a civic helper. You become part of the fabric of your community. So you're not working toward being essential. You're working toward indispensability. That's the goal.
It's a good word. Yeah. Yet
nobody does.
Let's get into the hard. Well, this is where I want to go, because the truth is I've been reading your stuff for a while. So I now want to take you a step beyond that and say, because I've worked in 5 or 6 different nonprofits also. How and why do we want stupid board of directors who don't understand that when you lose an artistic director and you replace them, that you're not looking for the same thing to just do the same thing and continue to beg for money? And all you're going to use the money for, if you get it, is to cover doing some of the shows that the artistic director desires to do, and then be asked for money. Every board of directors, they have to promise to give the money that you can't raise otherwise. And I'm glad they're there, and bless them for trying to help an organization. But how, since they're going to hire the next people, how do we move on? Is there any way you can think of?
Because Scene Change just came out in February, and I can announce to the listeners here, you're among the first people to hear this, so take advantage of it. When you go online, I don't know if you'll offer them a link or something, but when you go online to your bookstore, look up my name, Alan Harrison. If you type in Scene Change, that'll work too. And you're going to see a second book, Scene Change 2, which has been written. It is at the publisher's house, and they're going to release it at the end of the year, hopefully before Christmas. Scene Change 2,
yes,
the 5 real responsibilities for nonprofit arts board members, will answer all of those questions. A board is, so a lot of people ask, who owns
No, Alan, I'm sorry to stop you. So this is a lesson plan for people already on the board, as opposed to explaining to me why board members who don't read and don't want to learn are ever going to follow it.
And that's a problem, obviously. So what I tell board, so we did a survey. I did a survey before doing this second book, and it was to 1,000 people who are board members across the country. And I asked them what their most important responsibility is. And the biggest answer I got back, other than I don't know, which was first, was governing, which means nothing to them. There's no skin in the game of governing. I don't really know what it means. It means you're voting on stuff, I guess. So my conclusion that I drew from this study was that they have no idea why they're there, other than they wrote a check once, or that they're being asked to write a check, or
and it looks good on a resume.
Maybe it looks good on a resume, but mostly, or their company has to, it looks highly upon people who join local boards, and they live near the theater. So, okay, I'll join that one. And when they give money, they generally, I think that there should be an amount of money that every board member of every nonprofit has that they give to the nonprofit on which they sit, whether it's an arts organization or the Red Cross. You have to, because you're asking other people to give, you have to have given yourself. Otherwise, it's an empty ask. And I always say it has to be among the 3 highest gifts you give in a given year. And the honor system is up to you, whatever that means to you. If $50 satisfies that, then give $50. But they really don't know how the whole thing works. So who owns a nonprofit? My father was a CPA for 50 years, never worked with a nonprofit. Near the end, he asked me, Alan, who owns your company? Who's the owner? And I glibly said, well, Dad, you are. I am. Everybody who's in this house is. And he asked, no, really, who's the owner? And I said, you understand what a nonprofit is. It is tax exempt from certain state taxes. Why? And certain federal. Why is because the state gave them a license that said, you're going to do good work in our community that satisfies our rules, and we're going to let you be exempt from taxes. But those taxes still have to be paid. So who's paying them? You are. I am. Everybody is. You don't even have to donate to the theater to be paying for the theater. Everybody is who pays taxes in that state. So the board then is made up of people who have to respond to their boss, which is everybody in the state. So they represent their feelings, not their own. And then below that is, the regular organizational chart. I have a new idea for organizational chart in the second book, but I'm not going to get into that here. But that's what they're supposed to be doing. So one of the things I tell boards, and I will say this, is that throw out your Robert's Rules of Order. It's irrelevant. No vote needs to be unanimous, but every decision has to be consensus driven. So even if you don't agree with what has just been passed, your job as a board member is to stand right behind it and do it. That's called consensus. It's rare. It's not a democratic thing. If it becomes a democratic thing, then you have people who win and people who lose, and you don't want people who feel like losers on your side. The other thing I always tell people, in any meeting, in any board meeting of any kind, I do this especially when I facilitate board meetings, is why don't we think about how many people are in this room right now at a board meeting, and we'll count. And let's say there are 20 people, because I don't do multiplication all that well. And let's say their average consulting fee is $100 an hour. Again, it's probably more, but it's easier to multiply that way. That means you're as a nonprofit, your charity is spending $2,000 an hour as a consulting fee for your board. If you are spending $2,000 an hour for consulting, do you want to talk about the past? Do you want to talk about what depreciation means on your budget? Or do you want to talk about the future? It's simple.
That's a great.
The future.
Yeah. The problem is, and you know,
it's the not reading part.
Most boards. Well, it's the not reading, and the boards are told pretty much that we're going to give you a report. We're going to tell you a general idea, even though you may get a budget. We're going to tell you a general idea of how we're doing. You're going to make up the deficit. And then we're going to tell you what kinds of things the artistic director would like to do in the future. And then you're going to have to either rubber stamp or find a financial problem in the budget or approve it. And that's about it. You're there to rubber stamp, and for the three people on the board who know anything about finances, usually the accountants that have come in, you're going to say, this budget looks right to me, or this accounting looks right to me. We can turn in our IRS report at the end of the year.
Accounting,
and that's
the
it.
Accounting may
that's
look
all
right.
they do.
That's not that hard. And all that. No, the board, as representatives of the community, have the responsibility to say, what are you doing for the people of my community? But they don't do it.
Yeah, well, I'm saying they don't.
So as long as that happens, there will always be scarce money. Companies will always be flailing. They will always be at risk of losing money. There'll always be stupid ideas like this stage act that's being bullied through the Senate and House right now, and it will never pass. The stage act is to give $5 billion to theaters, only theaters, and only about 80 of them. Funny, how many theaters are in Lort? I think maybe 80. Yeah.
Oh,
anyway, so only the biggest theaters would ever see the money, even though it would be transmitted from the state arts councils or whatever. But they don't. The state arts councils don't know. So they'll just give it to the biggest theater, and then they'll do some form of trickle down, and it never works, and nobody ever sees any better stuff. And in 5 years, they'll be right back at the feeding trough saying, we need more money.
So, okay, Alan, and I know you're writing about this. There's got to be somebody out there, even if it's not exactly what you or I or Darnell would want to see, somebody out there trying to do the right thing. Where are these people? And how do we make a big example out of them?
And Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
Start with Louisville, Kentucky. The Louisville Orchestra was in your basic city orchestra relatively 15 years ago. They work in a big, scary hall. I say scary because it's imposing and kind of off-putting. If you've never been there and you're asked to go there, it's as though you feel you're not smart enough to walk in the building. It's that kind of a place. somewhere between, I don't know, a castle and a prison. But there it is. But that's fine. Every city, I think every large city has one of those. So you have to figure out what to do with that. And it was built in the 80s, and that was the style. So then they suspended operations, and then they got a new conductor a few years after that. And the conductor is a young man named Teddy Abrams. At the time, he was in his 20s. And he was the conductor. He had worked with Michael Tilson Thomas. He had the artistic bona fides to go with it. Mm-hmm. But he kept saying, I care that the music needs to be the best quality it is. But to end my discussion at producing excellent work is stupid because, of course, we're doing excellent work. We're the Louisville Orchestra. So let's take that as the baseline, as the floor of what we're trying to do here. That's a given, rather than something to aspire to. So if that's the case, what are we doing for the people of Louisville? And wait a minute, what are we doing for the people of Kentucky? Every single person in this state is paying for us. And since then, I spent a month with them. And since then, they now do 17 performances a year in that big hall in Louisville. Most of them are around Christmas. And beyond that, they'll do a couple of hundred performances at every county, every small city, every big city in the state of Kentucky. They go to libraries and rec centers and bars and I love the phrase subsidized housing, aka the projects. They go to dining halls. They go to high school gyms. I went to a performance in a high school gym. So what they do is they not only bring the orchestra, that's not enough. They want to celebrate the music of Kentucky. So they'll bring in and they'll do a couple of pieces, some new, some they have composers in residence. So these people all get to hear world premieres. And then they also have a couple of pieces that they'll do that are outside that, maybe something that's familiar. But then they bring out the music of Kentucky. So in this high school gym that I went to, they had people on the edge of their seats, dressed in the work clothes that they were wearing at the job. There were guys who clearly had just either come off the farm or out of a factory. One guy in front of me in a work shirt, and I'm rubbing my arm right now because it had a stain the length of the arm. It was not intended to be there. So he just got off of work. He's got his family with him, and the wife and the two kids are all wearing their church clothes. And they're in these plastic bleachers sitting absolutely on the edge because in front of the Louisville Orchestra comes Michael Cleveland's bluegrass band. And they combined the music of bluegrass and symphony orchestra to create a sound that was, from a musician's ear, I am a musician, from a musician's ear, it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. And it was exciting, and it would cause the hair on the back of your neck to go up just to hear it. Because there's no ego about, music isn't music unless it's done by dead white European men. It's absolutely about the music. Kentucky is a music-rich state. So it's that. It's performing. They have a hip hop group that performs with them. They have again, the bluegrass. They also have different versions of the bluegrass who are maybe more folk. So it's a mandolin player. They played at Mammoth Cave, at the caves, for a crowd that was
free of charge.
Free of charge to come into these communities. They've been funded by the state of Kentucky, which is a very red state, and the money is not coming from an arts budget. It is coming from the state as a community service budget. They got $4 million over a 2-year period to do it. And it looks like, knock wood, they're going to get another $4 million for the next 2 years because it works so beautifully. So many people wrote their congressman, called them, thank you for making this happen. Here goes on top of it. I'm interviewing some of the people who are watching. I come across this young woman, high school student. I didn't know she was a high school student at the time. She looked older, but I interviewed her anyway. She says, yeah, I'm a high school student. I'm getting all A's. I've gotten A's all the way through high school. I'm in AP classes. But, music is really what makes me sane. I said, explain that to me. She says, well, the Louisville Orchestra came to the neighboring town last year, and I had a friend who took me to that high school to go see it. And until that time, I was pretty lost. I didn't know what, typical teenager in many ways. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't see myself as an adult. I couldn't figure this out. So, and a lot fewer opportunities. Plus, she's in a small town. Everybody knows her. She knows everybody. So it's really hard to break out of that and excel out of that. It's really easy to just stay in town and do what your parents did. And she didn't want to do that, clearly. So she says, so I went to see them. I was turned on by the music. I realized that the music offered a way for my brain to think about problems and issues and things in a far different way. I knew that was part of it. So I joined band, having never played an instrument, because I really wanted to know how that felt. Well, now I live for band. Everything I do is about going to band every day. And I said, so what would have happened if the Louisville Orchestra didn't go to that other town? You didn't get to see them there. You didn't join band. And you didn't come see them tonight because it wasn't part of your life. She said, I don't want to get dark or anything, but I'd probably be dead. I was already having suicidal ideations. I was figuring out how to do it so that my mom and dad wouldn't be hurt so bad.
That, unfortunately and or unfortunately, theater, music, art, that is what has turned us into, I'll use the word addicts. We have all felt that. The reason I assume you're dealing with this and worried about it, why I am, why Darnell is, why almost everybody I know, whether they're in commercial or nonprofit, cares about. There's something that has said this is giving my life worth. And there is something about being part of the process. And that's what I've been struggling with, that when a nonprofit theater is talking, or a music organization is talking about, we're going to give you something to watch versus we're going to let you in on being part of the creative process, part of allowing yourself to be heard and seen and learn how to collaborate with other artists. That is almost nowhere.
That's at the center.
It is,
and again, it's about intent. It's at the center of the Louisville Orchestra's intent. So they also have a program that they hit every fourth and fifth grader in Jefferson County Public Schools. That's where Louisville is. Jefferson County Public Schools. Every fourth and fifth grader, so people get it twice, touches base with a musician from the Louisville Orchestra who hands them an instrument or teaches them about their instrument and talks to them about how to use this as collaborative stuff. Then they're asked to write compositions if they want, and people get to write compositions for 4 parts, 2 parts, 4 parts, 8 parts. Those get performed by the orchestra at a regular concert. They have a conducting program so that all these kids can learn how to conduct an orchestra. Why? Because it becomes part of their life. They learn a whole bunch of things that have nothing to do with an orchestra. They learn how to be self-confident and how, what music goes with what. And every last one, not everyone's going to be a musician, but boy, they're going to get the positives of having worked with musicians. Every single kid.
And what about theater? Okay, this is music.
It's not so different. So in Atlanta, there's out-of-hand theater. Well, let me talk to you about that. So out-of-hand theater no longer has a venue. They were struggling along. They were doing plays. The plays that they were doing were good. They were artistic. They were kind of different and all about the audience reaction, but pretty much ended there, right at the doors of the theater. That's like
New Haven.
Long Wharf?
I just lost the name of the theater. Long Wharf, thank you.
They've given up their space. Yes.
They're going. Yeah.
So the idea
Okay.
in Atlanta is that they get funding from corporations and government and whomever and individuals and everybody else. They take their shows, they perform in living rooms, they perform in rec centers, church basements, again, libraries. And they have several specific programs that are usually designed to talk about social justice. So there is one called Equitable Dinners. Well, they'll do a play. Right now they always partner with another nonprofit that is not an arts nonprofit. So Equitable Dinners, which is done for 2 years, will be the ACLU, the CDC. They received money from a Bloomberg grant for this. Again, people who don't give to the arts, right? They're the ones supporting this.
Right.
And they're supporting it because not only is there food is always a good way of bringing people together, but you're sitting at a table of 10 strangers. You see this play about a black man, for example, the one I saw, who is afraid to go to the doctor and all of the health inequity reasons that go with that. You know, he tells a real story about his own aunt. He mentions it, he calls it his mother, but his own aunt who died 5 days after childbirth, because while she kept saying, there's something wrong, they said, just take an aspirin and go home. And that happens more often with black people in the medical system, which is why black people die younger, which is why black people are loath to go get checkups, which makes them die younger, even if they're legitimate checkups, which makes black people not want to be doctors in the system, because as much as they're not heard as patients, you better believe they're not being heard as doctors. And it makes them loathe the whole process and wary. So what's the other thing that happens when they're wary of the medical process? That's covered in a second program called Equitable Vaccines. And we're not just talking about a COVID vaccine. We're talking about all the vaccines. And there is a statistic that said that black people in Georgia are less vaccinated than white people in Georgia. Why is that? Again, it goes to the first sessions of inequity in health, but then they start talking about it. So you get 10 people around the table talking about the problems, but it doesn't end there because they're all asked to commit to an action. And then they follow up with those same 10 people a week later. What were the actions that happened? What was the response that you got? Even accepting if the response is nobody would listen to me. Fine, that's okay. Just keep trying. Because the more we get the information out, not as flat information, but as something that has an emotional context to it, which is what theater can provide, rather than just saying statistics. To somebody who hears the statistics, it's one thing. To somebody see a guy sitting on stage in a doctor's office, scared out of his mind, that's a far different discussion. That's what theater can do. Again, they're centered around the idea of making the community better by getting the conversation started and the actions that take place after the conversation starts. It's one thing to engender conversations. You do that at a talkback of every play in America, but it usually ends there.
Right.
You've got to actually get the actions measured, and then you're doing fine. They have Coca-Cola behind them. It is Atlanta. They have a number of national folks. They just had the woman who runs the joint, who's one of the leaders of the joint, Arielle Fristow. Arielle was just up at Harvard. They just did a case study on them for the Harvard Business School to see how they can replicate this idea to other places. Because of that, the University of Michigan called her and said, we want to do an equitable dinner to see how we can help the people in Michigan, not just in Ann Arbor, but we have the city, maybe you've heard of it, Detroit, that has issues. And we need to figure out a way to help these people. And if the art can be used as a tool to help people, let's do that. And everybody I talk to at Out of Hand, who are all artists, mind you, they've all said to a person, this is far more fulfilling than just doing a really good play.
All right, I'm going to take you to a whole nother place. How do we pay our artists enough that they can survive?
So
within the scope, because what you're talking about is a mission, and the mission sounds phenomenal, and the mission relates to nonprofit, and it's what we ought to be doing. We barely pay our artists, our writers, our directors, our actors enough. They have to wait on tables. They can't do anything. How do we translate the system?
It's not a coincidence that both of those companies, the Louisville Orchestra and Out of Hand Theater, are running in a major surplus right now. It's again because the money isn't arts money, which is dwindling. The money is helping people money. It's charitable money. And if these other organizations would just see that and say, and stop doing an education program on the side because somebody might fund that. But what's the worst thing that happened if you even centered your education program and everything else was on the side? You mentioned Long Wharf. They're a brilliant company. I want to talk about them till the cows come home. They sold a building that they owned for 60 years. They stopped being a pre-Broadway company. Why? Because there are enough of those. In fact, there's another one in New Haven. It's called Yale Rep. They don't have to do that. So what's better? The city said what we need is to get these lower middle class workers some sort of art to help them see that their lives are worth something, because that's a bifurcated city. There's the Yale and there's this lower middle class, sort of the dock workers and such. That's it. There's kind of nobody in between. So they said, well, then why don't we do that? City gave them $4 million. Boom, done. That's how artists get paid. Every artist gets paid at Out of Hand. Every writer, every facilitator, everybody, every actor, obviously, just like every other theater, they get paid. Every artist at the Louisville Orchestra gets paid. Every composer that's in residence, obviously every staff member, every administrative staff member, every musician, everyone. In fact, that's a union house, so they're getting paid really well. And they're running in surplus.
Okay.
I think there's a lesson there that the money is not in the arts for art's sake. It's a terrible phrase. It's good. I guess it's good for artists themselves because it doesn't limit them into what they can create. But it doesn't also mean that they can sell their piece. It doesn't say art for dollar's sake. It's art for art's sake, you know. I had a friend who used to say, if it's art for art's sake, then let art pay for it. But instead, art for the community's sake, and then to prove that with metrics. Show me the metrics. Show me the results, and don't just tell me about them. If you're not collecting data as a nonprofit of any kind, including arts organizations, you're doing a terrible job. You're doing a terrible job of running your organization. And if you're collecting the right kind of data, stop collecting the data about how many people are coming. No one cares. No one cares how popular you are. And if somebody's actually asking for that information, okay, you might need to give it to them, but then the asker is wrong. And the asker is generally an arts fund, which has been using the same questionnaire for 50 years. And they don't care about what happens to the community. They just care that their name gets involved. So you end up with a toxicity among the people who are giving. And there are toxic donors everywhere. They're not just the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma. There are toxic donors at every single nonprofit arts organization that has no purpose beyond producing art. They're just people who just want stuff for their money.
So the idea of quote unquote, and we've been throwing the word art around, let's say entertainment for a minute. Okay. So Broadway, television, streaming, just things that perhaps aren't going to change our lives by the fact that we've seen it or been a part of it. It's just going to keep us diverted. Right? So the creation of that, should that only be commercial? Or, I mean, and I'm not saying even commercial shouldn't be producing art.
They can make money on it, sure.
But where is the place for entertainment in the nonprofit
That's a good
world?
question, because it's always been seen as entertainment is somehow not art. I think that's
right.
a horrible decision to decide that that's the case. It's not true. Entertainment is art. Art is entertainment. The question is either one of them important in the nonprofit setting? And the answer is no. Neither is important. Art it's just an activity that leads to a greater good. Mm-hmm. If you could tell me that it leads to a greater good, terrific. And that way I'll help raise money for you. But
so should somebody who, let's start with a young writer who has stories to tell. Okay, and they may not be the Disney stories. We're not talking Aladdin, but if they may have an important story, as you were talking about health, how the community deals with health issues, and something about suicide or whatever, an important topic that they feel right. Are they supposed to find only commercial backing for that, or use their own money? How do they become part of the nonprofit, or should they not be part of the nonprofit?
The answer to that is in the framing of the question. Tell the best story you could tell. Mm-hmm. Stop trying to please some other company with your story. Tell the best story you can tell. If a company wants to produce it because they think that there's going to be a goal of making the community better and they're a nonprofit, fine, they'll buy it. If there's a for-profit company that thinks it's so funny or so musical or so entertaining that they can make money off it, they'll buy it. But that shouldn't affect you writing the best story you can tell. Once the company has bought it, if they want to make changes into it, that hasn't changed for 1,000,000 years. They will. Right. They'll shorten it, they'll lengthen it, whatever it is. What was the story? Camelot was 5 hours long when it was in Philadelphia, and somebody said, no, cut it to 3. We have to pay overtime to the IATSE guys if you make it past 11 o'clock.
Okay, one I assume, and Darnell, stop me if I'm wrong, but I assume we're drawing to a close. Here's how do you reach the nonprofit executives? You're writing books, I don't know how you're able to write so much, which bless you for that. I mean, because every time I read one of your things, I said, well, he came from another angle. Okay, you're not repeating yourself. I'm really appreciative that you make me think in more ways than the last time you wrote something. So, and I do appreciate that. But the bottom line still is, as you're doing this interview, how do we reach the people who, as we said, don't read, don't listen, and are there for the wrong reasons and run everything?
I'm a writer. I write. I tell stories. I tell good stories for the most part. I tell stories about how to make an entire industry turn on a dime and become successful where it has been failing for the last, 20 years. If somebody wants to buy that story, as you have, and by buy I don't mean money,
yeah, I understand.
Then that's good. Then it's up to that person, and I help, but it's up to that person to tell somebody who tells somebody who tells somebody. If there are a stream of people, if there's a vein or an artery of people that are, old altacockers, as I call them, old farts to you, Darnell, maybe, who look at this and say, but I've been doing it the other way my entire career for 30, 40, 50 years. How could I have been wrong all this time? And just look at it as a personal attack. And that's the kind of hate mail I get. You're saying this, it's a personal attack. And to which I always say, it's not personal. I just want to save the industry from itself. Then those people need to either leave the premises, which is fine, or read the room. And generally speaking, they're not good at reading the room. So it's up to Darnell, you. It's up to you, Mitch, you. It's up to everyone around. I'm not saying this just to buy the book. I'm not going to make a lot of money off this book. I know that. I don't make any money off of the blog posts in Arts Journal and in LinkedIn every week.
Yeah, I know it. And by the way, that industry is a whole nother discussion.
But I only plan on being, on the planet the once. And I'd spent 30 years in this industry that I was always trying to figure out what really is this arts thing. It can't just end at the end of the footlights, can it? And the answer is no. It actually doesn't end at the footlights if you intend for it not to end at the end of the footlights.
Nicely put. Darnell, any last question?
There are some times when I start a prompt and then I just let the interview happen. And that was kind of this, because I've been processing your blog posts and getting through the book, and just to have you here, touching on those things, I'm just like, I'm
good.
full. Because our conversation, often Mitch and I have great conversation that lead us back to the beginning where we've asked the question, and the question and now the conversation has just prompted more questions. And so we don't feel defeated by it. It just means there's so much to talk about, and we should continue to engage in this conversation, because once we start talking about it, we get to these elements of like, oh, didn't realize that, like, the comments where you're talking about how that's the way we've always done it. Like, how many people are stuck in that mindset? And
I've heard strychnine. Strychnine is a good solution to that problem.
Yeah.
I've said any book that was written before the pandemic is kind of worthless now. Like, they need upgrades. They need like a new version, because all those books were written not thinking about how a pandemic would upset.
Well, there's some books that I've read to make this, to really push this point home. And I've written them in sort of I've written about them in sort of wild ass blog posts about the war that's coming, some other things. And some people are saying, what are you smoking? But really, these are based on books by futurists like, I don't just read art books. I read The Fourth Turning is a good example of a book that a lot of people read in college. Well, there was a sequel that just came out last year called The Fourth Turning is Here, and it's about talking about the world in terms of seasons. And we work in this 80 to 90 year cycle. This is the winter of that cycle. And the winter always ends with some major horrible thing that happens, like a war, which is why we're about, frankly, 407 years from the last big war. And that was 407 years from the last big war, which was 407 years from the one before that. And as it turns out, from the one before that, and the one before that, the one before that. So the cycles last the length of a long lifetime. We're due for a war in which we will have to sacrifice something, not the kind where it's them versus them, by about 2030. What that looks like, no idea. Is it civil? Is it external? Have no clue. But there'll be something like that. War is a horror, but there is a good that comes out of war, is that people who disagree with each other tend to come together for the common good. Maybe that'll happen. We're in a binary society right now. It's kind of awful. And it's got to end some way. And maybe that's the only thing that can make it end.
Well, and the hope, my personal belief at the moment is we're not going to change those who are stuck doing things the way they were. We have to create new, not institutions, but maybe collaborative organizations or art creating collaboratives or whatever you're going to call them, and do it a different way, and then let the others fade out by themselves in 20 years.
That's the Moses solution. Why it took 40 years to go through the desert is because they had to stop thinking of themselves as slaves. We've been waiting for that to happen for a while now, and I can tell you that in 50 years since I started acting, that's how far back I've actually been in the business, it hasn't changed all that much. But maybe if enough people read the book or read the ideas or read your comments on the book or comments on these ideas as you write and as you do, I'm looking for the chance to talk to people who don't believe in what I'm saying. And I'd love to have a debate with them on stage, just as Robert, what was his name? Robert Brustein and August Wilson had those debates on stage. Those were really good for the community. They were vicious, but they were really good community. And what both of them came up saying is what I would say is that you can argue with me if you want. You'll be wrong, but you can argue with me. Feel free. I want to see.
And let's go way back to Leonard Bernstein's educational PBS videos that took the art form and said, I am going to tell you something that's going to help you change your life. And it's not just coming to my concert paying for a ticket.
That's the perfect example.
Yeah, that's where you just brought me back to. Because it changed my life, and I was an infant.
That actually informs why the Louisville Orchestra is so successful. Because Michael Tilson Thomas was a student of Bernstein, put it in San Francisco. Teddy Abrams is a student of Michael Tilson Thomas and has put it in Louisville and taken it to a bigger stage, to an even bigger place.
Right.
They even won a Grammy last year. Right? Best instrumental solo was to the Louisville Orchestra's recording. And when Teddy got the award, he said, this is really nice. But we actually do this for the people of Kentucky.
Yeah. All right. On that note, I can't personally, I'm thrilled to meet you. And, excuse me, I'm thrilled to meet you. You're just happy to meet me. I get the difference. It's okay. That's okay.
I read your stuff too. You're good.
See, no. I'm not taking it personally, and I'm not going to send you hate.
All right.
How do you like that?
But so the book is called Scene Change. It's everywhere, right?
Is it Darnell's going to give you that whole thing
right now? And Scene Change, you get it at the same time because I think it's like $11 extra. So
yes.
So do that.
The order. Yep. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. I like I said before, in one of our earlier episodes, we were referencing one of your blogs, and we were just thinking about there aren't enough people having this conversation. I sit in meetings where we're talking about how do you get butts in seats, and I'm like, it's it's more than that. It's you can't just put something on stage and say, where are they? It has to be something that they want. It has to be something that is going to be a draw for them.
That they need.
Yeah, that they need, and yes, absolutely. There were many times where I was saying quietly, we don't want to admit that we're not essential right now.
Right.
We're not. I mean, okay, should I go to the food bank today or go to this discounted preview at XYZ Theater Company? And so it was that was just an interesting.
We've trained our donors to think that way.
We couldn't wait.
We've trained our donors to think that way. We've trained our donors that give to us and you'll get good seats. So you have a donor, the donors donate so that the donors may attend. The donors and the beneficiaries are the same person. Mm-hmm. Nowhere else do you see this.
And for some reason, they think because nonprofit, they're getting a cheap seat, and then they're asked to give another $1,000 donation. Well, your seat just cost over $1,000. It doesn't sink in. It's cheaper to go to Hamilton than it is to be a donor for some of these nonprofit theaters.
And somebody sat in that seat yesterday and didn't pay anything.
There you go.
But it breeds this toxicity that just keeps going on. And that evil toxicity, I mentioned it before, the Sacklers, but they're not alone. There's at least one person in every nonprofit where when they walk into the room, everybody in the development department scatters. And that's how you know the person is toxic.
Yeah. Well, the book is called Scene Change: Why Today's Nonprofit Arts Organizations Have to Stop Producing Art and Start Producing Impact. And there's a Scene Change 2 on the way, which you can pre-order. The links are in the show notes. And again, Alan Harrison, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today to unpack all of this. I don't think we solved anything, but I think this allows us to have more full-throated conversations as we continue.
I think we solved something. I actually think we did.
Good. I'm glad.
Hopefully.
But also, we'll link to your blog on the Arts Journal and your website and so on. Like really engage in this conversation, because I think even if you're the one person in your theater who is reading either this book or any of the blog posts, you're going to walk back into that space with a different thought process.
That's it. That's the change.
This starts conversation. And so that's it. It's about engagement, all of it, really. And so anything that's making you think and making you, stir up thoughts in your mind that like prompt more meaningful conversations. These are the things that we want, because that'll get us closer to, what we have to do next and what we need to continue to do for our communities. So thank you so much for chatting with us today, and I look forward to you coming back when Scene Change 2 is ready to be discussed.
And maybe even Scene Change 3, you don't know.
Pre-order in place. Yeah, there you go.
And by then, the whole world will have changed, of course.
Yes. So find out more about Alan Harrison in all the links that we provide. But that is The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And we will see you at the theater.
Yay.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of The Business of Theater, a working title, with Darnell Radford and Mitch Weiss. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the podcast with a friend, colleague, or give us some social media love. This podcast is an Emory production. Visit us online at em3ry.com/TBOT. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at em3ryotm.